Hello, and welcome to another Museum FAQ video. I'm Paul Orselli, President and Chief Instigator of POW, Paul Orselli Workshop, here on Long Island. And I chose my background especially for our special guest today, all the way from the wilds of Chicago, Peter Exley. And thanks, Peter, for taking the time today. I appreciate it. I always like to start out by people telling us a little bit about themselves and their background, sort of how they got to where they are now. So if you wouldn't mind starting with that, and then we'll roll into the conversation.
Great, thanks Paul for having me. So as you could tell, I'm not really from Chicago. My accent gives me away. I grew up on a farm in the north of England, but I always wanted to be an architect. And I studied at University of Newcastle in the north of England, and then at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia in the late 1980s, and found myself in Chicago. And in Chicago, I actually say I spend a third of my time being an architect. So I'm the co-founder of a woman-owned business. Architecture is Fun. Share the responsibility of leading that firm with Sharon Exley, who's my partner in life. And we are a small but mighty design organization. I spend a third of my time nurturing the next generation of design professionals and artists. I'm a professor at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, something I've done for almost 30 years. And then the other third of my time is in service and leadership. And I've made a real commitment to leadership in the American Institute of Architects. And I am currently the 2021 president-elect of the American Institute of Architects, which is a 95,000 member organization based in Washington, DC. So I suspect that that third thing is going to adjust a little bit as I take the helm of the AIA next year as its president. But I like to say it's an equal split right now. But if you ask Sharon, she'll probably take a little issue with some of that.
Well, she's not here right now, so we're just hearing your side of the story. Well, you know, it's an honor to have the president of AIA here. I'm recalling historians always say that you can only have a great president during great times of tumult or transition. So lucky you.
Yeah.
So Peter, I'd like to start the conversation really with maybe one of those one-third hats, or maybe all of them really, to talk a little bit about design and the implications of course, we're recording this during the COVID-19 pandemic, but there are always times of transition, the 2008 recession, the economic crisis, 9/11, all sorts of things that always happen. And how design maybe really helps play a part about moving forward beyond those times and adjusting and looking for the opportunities beyond those times. So I wanted to maybe get a sense from your standpoint. I know before we started the conversation, we had emailed back and forth, and you said quite aptly, I think, that we're not going to solve the problems of reopening buildings or reopening museums with just a lot of new hand sanitizer stations or stickers on the floor to promote physical distancing. So rather than that ham-fisted approach, what are your thoughts in terms of how design could really be helpful in terms of when civic institutions, museums, libraries, schools, universities begin to reopen?
It's apt that you sat in front of the Eames house as your background there. Charles and Ray Eames talked about the best design solutions emanating from the sum of constraints. And boy, in this time of COVID, and hopefully soon at sort of post-COVID time, here is a constraint par excellence, right? These types of challenges, and as you talk about hand sanitizers, and I'm not exactly cynical, but disappointed that the first solution is merely something that has come from a vendor. So it's a screen between two people, something that is antisocial, really, and it's promoting physical distancing, sort of. We have to start looking at solutions that are probably a little more blue sky than that. We will go into a supermarket and do that transactional exchange just because that's the only way we know how to buy groceries. But we go to museums and other civic institutions for far more sort of creative and inspirational exchanges. And so it would seem to me that just taking out that transactional experience and just getting right down to the business of what we do in museums, which basically usually has something to do with education, that's what we should be focusing our efforts on. I will make a little plug here for people and organizations and building managers that are going back into their buildings or trying to figure out how to make them safe and welcoming for their staff and hopefully for visitors. The AIA has put out a building re-occupancy toolkit that if you go to aia.org and click on COVID-19 resources, you should be able to find that there. And we'll share a link with you on this podcast, I think. But it's a really excellent checklist and goes through a lot of pragmatic issues. So how does design beyond the hand sanitizer and the sneeze guard come into play? I really think it has a lot to do with the sort of narrative that you imagine goes alongside the experience of being in a museum. All of the best museum civic experiences of our own childhoods and the things that we share with our families are really vivid memories, and we're in the business of making memories, right? So I've been talking with a large natural history museum, and to this idea about perhaps eliminating the transactional experience, not selling you a ticket in a traditional way. I wondered about perhaps crafting a series of experiences in a museum. And being in Chicago here, one of our famous sons and daughters is Kanye. So I was wondering, well, what about having, Kanye's favorite dinosaur tour in the museum as a way to entice you back in? Or perhaps it's Mayor Lightfoot's Bugs and Beer tour. And that what you do by sort of rebranding the experience in this post-COVID time is to create a series of linear experiences that are designed to keep people apart in the museum. So rather than just, as we love them to be, museums being currently free-for-alls, in an effort to distance each other, we have timed choreographed experiences that are really crafted to help people have a strong and worthwhile and on-mission experience, but to help them avoid other patrons. You could imagine if there's 10 of those in an enormous museum, it actually ought to be quite easy to keep people apart.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned sort of balancing this utilitarian aspect on one side and the blue sky on the other side. When you were just talking about these choreographed experiences, I don't know if you are familiar with the mile-long opera that happened on the High Line here in New York. It was awesome. And you know, there were a lot of people, and it's a mile-long linear experience, but they pulsed people through, and you know, in retrospect, you never felt crowded, even though it was they ultimately moved a lot of people through that experience. But it was a very creative way of rethinking that very linear, very, very crowded urban park. And
Yeah. Yeah, and what you're describing there is something that has enabled physical and social interaction. It's just that physical interaction is just this far apart. But with this blue sky thinking and this sort of connectivity to a creative conceptual idea, now let's go singing on the High Line. Let's follow in Kanye's footsteps through a natural history museum. You know, these are the things that create these personal memories. We perhaps only go to that museum once a year, once a decade, maybe once in a lifetime. But if we give it meaning and we don't make it random, and the museum professionals and designers that are associated with those museums, we come up with ideas like this all the time. We just have to apply them. Alongside this COVID constraint, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think you know, sometimes they talk about the responses to tricky situations, or the not being able to anticipate tricky situations being a failure of imagination. And I think maybe that's part of this conversation too. Well, I'm going to keep my eyes and ears open for either Kanye dinosaur tours or bugs and beer. I don't know. Bugs and beer might be more my speed, but I'll keep an eye open for that. Well, you know, Peter, I know you mentioned your work as a professor, and your work, obviously, service work through AIA. One thing I know that we talked about briefly, but I'd love for you to expand on, is this notion of mentorship in the context of, you know, here now there has been this disruption, especially to young people in their schooling, and even young adults in their university schooling. And I mean, wow, it's like playing the sad trombone. Wah, wah, wah. Well, you graduated, you didn't get a ceremony or anything, and good luck finding a job. Good luck finding an internship. What are your thoughts in terms of ways that we could really help think about that and not lose a whole creative generation of designers and thinkers?
You know, mentorship has been a really fortuitous part of my career, and I owe where I am today, presumably through my own personal tenacity and expertise, but mostly because at some point somebody has tapped me on the shoulder and said, you know, you should go and try this out. You should volunteer for this. And there's been a mentor or somebody who has just pushed me along at the right time. And it became evident to me very early on in my career that this was happening to me. People were doing that for me. And very quickly I thought, oh, well, I can be part of this too, and I can give back. You know, typically in a mentor and protege relationship, it's always a two-way street. And, you know, I think young professionals now, particularly in the design fields, have technical aptitude with digital tools, for instance, that flummox, let's just say, not quite as young individuals such as Paul and myself.
Like us.
Yeah. So, you know, the application of those tools and how those become everyday, you know, just sort of conveniences, you know, that they are literally tools that make the emerging professional's life and skill set, more adept to situations. That's useful to more seasoned individuals like me. So I always feel it's a two-way street. The current crisis, and as we've seen before in previous recessions, particularly in the architecture and design professions, have really decimated the workforce pipeline. And the burden and the tragedy of that is felt initially by the graduates, those still in school that were hoping to have an internship over the summer to prep them for the following semester. Well, all of those jobs, all of those internships that were offered in January or February of this year, they've all been rescinded and they've evaporated. So this is an opportunity now, having seen several of scenarios that have precipitated this loss of an emerging generation, that it has decimated our workforce. It is in our prudent best interest right now to start mentoring those young people. If we can't give them a job, we should be giving them a foot in the door and tapping them on the shoulder and say, look, hey, there's this opportunity. It's coming down the road. You've got to be patient. But in the meantime, let's check in once a month, once a week. I'd love to talk to you about how we approach getting work in our office. I'd love to help you study for your licensing exams or give you resources from our office to do that. There's a whole myriad of opportunities that we can give that can support the career development that likely you would have been giving in your own design organization. But because, that young person hasn't gotten in there yet, they're missing out on. And I think it's really critical at all levels. We're thinking like that and supporting. We're supporting all of us in this very stressful time.
Yeah, it's. I think also when you look at where many of the layoffs or furloughs or pick your euphemism. Especially in the museum business where they're happening at the entry levels or mid levels and younger people and people that are the future of the museum business, and now wait, you don't have a job anymore. So I think your concern and your advocacy for mentorship is really spot on in terms of I'll just say again how not to lose the future of any creative industry, of any industry in general, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean this could be the moment where you tap a young person on the shoulder and say, please, will you come and join our auxiliary board? Will you come and join our women's board, our emerging professionals board? Will you help us organize this online auction? Just so that you have that foot in the door and that leg up.
And that
I also, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and also so that you keep these connections and you keep broadening your network as a new person or a younger person in a field. Go ahead.
Yeah. We are, as more seasoned professionals, we are actually quite accessible. So for anybody who is even younger than us, please reach out to somebody you admire in an organization. And I think 9 times out of 10, you're going to find that your tap on the shoulder to them is going to be received favorably, and people will make time for you, just as they made time for Paul and me.
I'll tell you, when I was first starting out, it always really meant a lot to me when people would offer, even if they couldn't offer a job, they could offer a kind word or resource or a connection to another person. And man, now somebody reaches out to me, I definitely want to take the time to respond. So I think that's really good point that you bring up.
Yeah. And we
Um,
also love getting thank you notes for things that we've done. And that is, a really beautiful follow-up. And I would recommend, if you do start a relationship, like, always say thank you. That thank you note will mean the world, and it will extend that relationship, and it will validate that relationship.
yeah, these are creative relationships, and that's sort of, it's not a nicety. It really just shows admiration and respect and collegiality. So I think that's good. I hate to be the old man in the corner saying, I hope all you kids are paying attention to this, but I hope you are paying attention to this. Well, Peter, I really appreciate you taking the time today. I feel compelled, since it's right there over your shoulder, to ask you about that impressive Lego. It looks like a Lego Statue of Liberty model there. Can you, that seems like a really perfect thing for a designer and an architect with a playful approach. Are you a Lego fanatic? Are you a Lego aficionado?
There are literally dozens of these things around our house. I didn't make much of it at the beginning, but the name of our firm is Architecture is Fun. And it's not irreverent at all. It's the relationship that we have with all of the people that we collaborate with on their really important projects. You make an enormous capital investment when you commit to working with a designer. And for us, over the 26 years of our practice, that's always been a participatory process, involving non-designers, are essentially usually our clients in that experience. We hope is a rewarding and fun experience, and having them buy into it and understand why certain decisions were made is really critical. And for a firm called Architecture is Fun, play and sort of engagement through tools like this, or that play is not just the domain of childhood, has been a constant mantra for us. Our purpose is to make everyday life more fun.
Well, that's a high purpose indeed, and
Yeah.
you made my day more fun today by taking the time to have this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.